Beyond the stars, when fear turned to love, the isolation chamber smelled of antiseptic and fear. Dr. Elena Martinez stood before the reinforced glass, her dark eyes fixed on the alien creature within. The Arxion's iridescent scales shifted from deep purple to midnight blue, a clear sign of distress that Elena had learned to recognize during her years studying xenobiology. Subject appears to be experiencing elevated stress levels. She spoke into her recorder, trying to keep her voice professional despite the growing knot in her stomach. Physical signs consistent with previous observations of Arxian emotional states. The alien, designation A137, watched her with all four of its eyes, each one a swirling galaxy of silver and gold. Its muscular frame was restrained by energy fields, though Elena had argued against such measures. The creature had been found wounded, barely conscious, in a restricted zone outside New Phoenix Colony. Standard protocol demanded immediate containment of any unauthorized alien presence. But something about this didn't feel right. Elena switched off her recorder and stepped closer to the glass. The Arxion's scales rippled, but it held her gaze. There was intelligence there, and something else, a desperate pride that reminded her too much of herself. "I know you can understand me," she said softly, switching off the observation room's primary recording devices. "My universal translator detected your language patterns earlier. You're not just some mindless creature that wandered into our territory, are you?" The Arxion's upper eyes narrowed, while the lower pair widened slightly, a gesture Elena had never seen documented. "You are different from the others," it spoke, its voice a harmonious blend of tones that made her translator crackle. "You see me as I am, not as what your kind fears." Elena's heart raced. Direct communication with an Arxian was unprecedented. Their species had remained largely isolated since first contact 30 years ago, sharing only the most basic diplomatic relations with Earth. "I'm Dr. Elena Martinez. I'm a xenobiologist, but I'm not here to hurt you. Will you tell me your name?" The creature's scales shifted again, hints of silver appearing among the blue. "I am Devrak Nathori, Royal Guard of the Third Sphere. And you, Elena Martinez, are now in grave danger by speaking with me." Elena glanced at the door, ensuring it remained sealed. "What do you mean? Why were you in the restricted zone?" "I did not come here by choice." Devrak's scales darkened. "I was pursuing those who would destroy both our worlds. Traitors who experiment on both humans and Arxians, seeking to create weapons beyond imagination." The alien's voice dropped lower. "I discovered their facility, but they detected me. The wound that brought me here, it was no accident." Elena's mind raced. She'd noticed anomalies in Devrak's injury patterns. They hadn't matched any known weapons or natural causes. "The higher-ups told us you were a dangerous fugitive who had to be contained. And you questioned this story, did you not? You saw something your fellows missed." Devrak pressed one four-fingered hand against the glass. "There is a reason my people have kept distance from humans. We feared your capacity for violence, your unpredictability. But we failed to see your capacity for compassion, for seeing truth where others embrace convenient lies." A warning light flashed on Elena's tablet. The security system's automatic reboot was coming. In moments, all recordings would resume. She made a decision that would change everything. "The containment field runs on a rotating frequency," she whispered quickly. "There's a 3-second gap during each cycle. In exactly 47 seconds, when the lights flicker, the field will be down. If someone were to use that moment to escape, they'd have approximately 12 minutes before the facility went into full lockdown." Devrak's scales flashed with patterns Elena had never seen before. "You would risk your career, your freedom, to help me. Why?" "Because my gut tells me you're telling the truth. And because if there really are people experimenting on both our species, someone needs to stop them." Elena checked her tablet again. 30 seconds. "When you get out, head to sublevel B. There's a maintenance tunnel that leads to the surface. Follow the red pipes." "Come with me," Devrak said suddenly. You have shown me that humans are capable of more than we believed. You have knowledge that could help expose this conspiracy, and they will surely discover your role in my escape." The lights began their warning flicker. Elena's heart pounded as she watched Tuvrak tense, preparing. 20 years studying your species, and I never imagined my first real conversation with an Archean would end with me becoming a fugitive. Is that a yes, Elena Martinez? The containment field dropped. In one fluid motion, Tuvrak shattered the already weakened glass, moving with a speed that justified the Royal Guard title. A scaled hand grabbed Elena's arm, surprisingly gentle despite its alien strength. "Yes," she whispered, and they ran. The next 12 minutes were a blur of alarms, flashing lights, and the strange sensation of running alongside a creature she'd only ever observed through barriers. Tuvrak moved with deadly grace, disabling security measures before Elena could even point them out. They reached the maintenance tunnel just as the facility's locks engaged, sealing them into their escape route. As they crawled through the narrow space, guided by the dull red glow of the heating pipes, Elena finally processed what she'd done. She'd thrown away her career, her reputation, everything she'd worked for, all on the word of an alien she'd just met. "Your heart rate is elevated," Tuvrak observed as they emerged into the cool night air. "You are afraid." "Wouldn't you be?" Elena laughed shakily, checking her tablet's map for the safest route away from the facility. "I just committed about 15 federal crimes." "You are afraid, yet you act with conviction. This is why I trust you." Tuvrak's scales rippled with silver and gold, a pattern she'd never documented. "My people believe that truth shows itself in moments of crisis. When you chose to help me, you showed your true nature." Distant sirens began to wail. Elena pointed toward the dense forest that bordered the facility. "We need to move. I have a research cabin about 20 kilometers from here. It's off the grid. We can use it to plan our next move." As they disappeared into the darkness, Elena felt a strange sense of peace despite their desperate situation. She'd spent her life studying the barriers between species, documenting differences and similarities from a safe academic distance. Now she was living it, breaking down those barriers in ways she'd never imagined. "Tuvrak," she whispered as they picked their way through the underbrush, "what was that pattern your scales made back there? I've never seen it in any of our research." The Archean was quiet for a moment, navigating around a fallen tree. "It is an expression of profound respect and gratitude. It is also, among my people, the first sign of a deep bond forming, one that transcends ordinary relationships." Elena nearly tripped. "You mean?" "I mean that perhaps both our species have much to learn about connection, Elena Martinez. But first, we must survive long enough to expose the truth." They moved deeper into the forest, an unlikely pair united by crisis and choice. Behind them, searchlights began to sweep the facility grounds, and ahead lay uncertainties neither could fully imagine. But in that moment, running through the Earth night with an alien fugitive, Elena felt more alive than she had in all her years of safe observation. The stars wheeled overhead, watching as two beings from different worlds began a journey that would challenge everything both their species thought they knew about each other. It was just the beginning, but already, fear was turning into something else entirely. Dawn broke over the research cabin as Elena finished securing the perimeter sensors. Her hands trembled slightly as she calibrated the last device, exhaustion and adrenaline warring in her system. Behind her, Tuvrak emerged from the cabin, moving with that fluid grace that still caught her off guard. "The communication systems are problematic," the Archean said, scales shifting to a deep green that Elena was beginning to recognize as frustration. "Your Earth technology is primitive, yet somehow also needlessly complex." Elena couldn't help but smile despite their situation. "Says the alien who just bypassed 3 layers of quantum encryption to check if we were being tracked." That was simple mathematics. Your user interfaces, however. Tuvrak's upper eyes narrowed while the lower pair blinked in sequence, an expression Elena was learning meant something between amusement and exasperation. Their light-hearted moment evaporated as Elena's tablet chirped. They've expanded the search radius. We have maybe 3 hours before they reach this sector. She ran a hand through her dark hair, mind racing. We need evidence of this conspiracy you mentioned, something concrete enough to take to both governments. Dvorak moved closer, and Elena noticed his scales had taken on that silvery pattern again, the one he called a sign of bonding. The facility where they held me was not their primary research center. Before my capture, I discovered coordinates to their main laboratory. It lies in the neutral zone between our territories. The dead zone. Elena's eyes widened. The stretch of space between Earth and Arxian territory was supposedly uninhabitable, ravaged by ancient cosmic events. That's actually brilliant. Neither side patrols it because of the radiation. Radiation that does not affect my people as severely as yours, Dvorak noted, his tone carrying an edge of concern. The journey would be dangerous for you. Elena moved to her research station, pulling up classified files she'd downloaded years ago. Maybe not. Look at this. It's a prototype radiation shield I was developing for deep space exploration. The brass shut it down for being too experimental, but the theory was sound. She felt Dvorak's presence behind her, remarkably close for a being who'd been in restraints just hours ago. His scales emitted a faint warmth she could feel even through her clothes. Your design is innovative, similar to technologies my people abandoned centuries ago, yet you've approached it from an entirely different direction. Could we combine them? Elena turned, finding herself face to face with the Arxian. This close, she could see intricate patterns in his scales she'd never noticed in her research. Your people's experience, my new approach. Dvorak's 4 eyes focused on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. You continue to surprise me, Elena Martinez. Most humans would hesitate to merge technologies with an alien species. Most humans haven't spent 20 years dreaming of exactly this kind of collaboration, she admitted. Though I'll admit, I imagined it happening with fewer death threats and conspiracies. A new pattern rippled across Dvorak's scales, one she hadn't seen before, waves of blue and gold intermingling. You speak of collaboration while my people still debate whether humans can be trusted with basic star charts. His voice carried an undertone she couldn't quite interpret. Perhaps both our species had been too quick to judge. Their moment of understanding was shattered by a distant sound that made both of them freeze, helicopter rotors. Elena's tablet confirmed her fears. The search parties had changed pattern. They were coming straight for them. We need to move, Dvorak said, already gathering their essential equipment. The radiation shield. Elena quickly transferred the files to a secure drive. We can work on it while we travel. I know a place. An old mining facility in the mountains. It has the tools we'd need, and it's shielded from most scans. They moved with practiced efficiency, erasing all traces of their presence. As Elena did a final sweep, she found Dvorak staring at her research notes, his scales showing that complex pattern again. Your observations of my people, he said quietly. They're not just scientific. You wrote about our art, our music, the patterns of our social bonds. Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks. I always believed that understanding a species meant more than just studying their biology. Your culture, your ways of connecting, they're just as important. The patterns you documented, Dvorak continued, his voice taking on an odd resonance. Did you ever discover what this one means? His scales shifted, displaying the intricate dance of blue and gold she'd seen earlier. No, she admitted. It wasn't in any of our official records. Dvorak moved closer, his alien features somehow conveying emotions she was beginning to understand all too well. It is an expression of profound confusion, of finding connection where one least expects it, of barriers breaking down. The helicopter sounds grew closer. Elena's heart raced, but not just from fear. Dvorak, We must go, he said, but his hand brushed against hers as they turned to leave. But perhaps when we are safe, We can discuss the many patterns your research has yet to document. They fled into the mountain paths, keeping to the shadows of the ancient pines. Elena found herself hyper-aware of every movement Dvorak made, every shift in his scales. She'd spent her career studying the differences between their species, but now she was discovering something far more fascinating: the ways in which they were alike. As they climbed higher into the mountains, a plan began to form in Elena's mind. If they could reach the mining facility, combine their technologies, and find proof of the illegal experiments, they might have a chance. But more than that, they could prove something greater: that humans and Arxians could work together, trust each other, maybe even. She pushed that thought aside as they reached a ridge overlooking the valley. Search teams were visible below, their vehicles cutting dark paths through the morning mist. Dvorak's hand found hers again, steadier this time, deliberate. "Your heart rate has increased," he noted, his scales rippling with that now familiar silver pattern. "Yet you are not afraid." "No," Elena agreed, tightening her grip on his hand. "I'm not afraid at all." Above them, Earth's sun painted the sky in colors that reminded her of Dvorak's scales. They were fugitives, running from both their peoples, pursuing a truth that might change everything. Yet somehow, as they stood there together, Elena felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The journey ahead would be dangerous, the odds against them astronomical, but they had something their pursuers didn't: a connection that transcended species, a trust born in crisis, but growing into something neither of them had words for yet. As they turned toward the mining facility and whatever fate awaited them there, Elena realized that some barriers, once broken, could never be rebuilt. And perhaps that was exactly what both their worlds needed. The abandoned mining facility loomed before them, its rusted structures jutting from the mountainside like the bones of some ancient beast. Elena wiped sweat from her brow as she worked on bypassing the facility's old security system, while Dvorak kept watch, his scales shifting through patterns that helped him blend with the shadows. "Got it," Elena whispered as the door slid open with a groan of protest. The interior was dark, musty with decades of disuse. Their footsteps echoed through empty corridors as emergency lights flickered to life, responding to the power surge from Elena's override. "This place still has functional equipment," Dvorak observed, his 4 eyes scanning the machinery. "Primitive by my standards, but useful." His scales rippled with an excited pattern Elena hadn't documented before. "The facility was abandoned during first contact," Elena explained, moving to a central console. "Everyone was too busy looking to the stars to care about Earth's minerals anymore. But they left everything here, including..." She pressed a sequence of buttons, and a hidden panel slid open, revealing a sophisticated laboratory. "This." Dvorak moved closer, examining the equipment. "A secret research facility within a mining operation. Clever." "It was my mother's," Elena said softly. She was part of the first contact team, studying ways to protect humans from alien biology. Not weapons, medicines, shields, ways to help us coexist. But after the Arxian isolation protocols were established, they shut her down, called her work too risky. And now her daughter aids an Arxian fugitive. Dvorak's scales shifted to that silver-gold pattern that made Elena's heart race. There is poetry in that. They worked through the night, combining Elena's radiation shield designs with Dvorak's knowledge of Arxian technology. The laboratory came alive with their shared purpose, human and alien working in a harmony that would have seemed impossible days ago. "The shield matrix is stabilizing," Elena announced, watching as their prototype hummed to life. "If this works, we can survive the dead zone long enough to find evidence of the conspiracy." "Elena," Dvorak's voice carried an urgency that made her turn. His scales were displaying a pattern she'd never seen: rapid pulses of deep purple and silver. "There is something you should know before we proceed." He moved closer, his alien features somehow conveying intense emotion. "The facility we seek, I believe your mother's research is connected to it." Elena's blood ran cold. "What? How?" The experiments I discovered, they build on theoretical work from Earth's first contact period, work that was supposedly abandoned. Drake's scales dimmed. I found references to a Dr. Martinez. Elena gripped the console for support, her mind racing. That's impossible. My mother died in a lab accident when I was 15. Her work was destroyed. Or stolen, Devrac said gently. The patterns match too perfectly to be coincidence. Someone took her research on human-alien biological compatibility and perverted it into something darker. Tears stung Elena's eyes as decades of questions suddenly found potential answers. All those years, I followed in her footsteps, trying to understand alien life, to build bridges, and someone was using her work to create weapons. Devrac's hand found hers, his alien touch now familiar, comforting. Your mother sought to unite our peoples. These conspirators twisted her vision into its opposite, but together we can expose them. Honor her true purpose. A sound from above made them both freeze, the distinctive whir of scanning equipment. They've been found. The radiation shield isn't ready, Elena said, quickly gathering their research data. We need more time. Time is something we no longer have. Devrac's scales shifted to battle-ready patterns. We must. The ceiling exploded. Black-clad figures rappelled down, weapons trained on them. But these weren't military or police. Their gear was unmarked, professional. A tall figure stepped forward, removing his helmet to reveal a face Elena knew all too well. Dr. Chen, she breathed. Her former mentor, the man who'd guided her career after her mother's death, smiled coldly. Elena, he sighed. You were supposed to study aliens, not fall in love with one. He glanced at Devrac with clinical interest. Though I must thank you both. Your escape provided exactly the field test we needed for our newer subjects. As if on cue, more figures emerged from the shadows. Elena's heart stopped. They were Arxens, but wrong. Their scales dull and lifeless, their movements mechanical. Devrac made a sound she'd never heard before, a harmonious note of horror. What have you done to them? He demanded, his scales flaring with rage. Improved them, Chen replied simply. Your mother's work was brilliant, Elena, but too cautious. She wanted to help species coexist. We saw the potential for so much more. Perfect soldiers, combining Arxian strength with human adaptability, stripped of those messy emotions that make both species so unreliable. Elena's mind raced. The controlled Arxians were moving to surround them, but their movements, there was a pattern. My mother would never have helped you create this abomination. No, Chen agreed. She wouldn't. That's why she had her accident. Everything clicked into place. Elena squeezed Devrac's hand, hoping he'd understand. You killed her because she discovered what you were planning. She was going to expose us to both governments. We couldn't allow that. Chen raised his hand, and the controlled Arxians tensed to attack. Just like we can't allow you to leave here alive, though your bodies will advance our research considerably. Devrac, Elena whispered. The pattern in their movements, it's like your combat forms but simplified. They can't improvise. The Arxian's scales flickered with understanding. Without warning, he spun, using moves Elena had never seen documented. The controlled Arxians tried to respond, but their programming couldn't match Devrac's fluid grace. In the chaos, Elena dove for the console, triggering the facility's old ventilation system. Ancient fans roared to life, filling the air with decades of mineral dust. The human's vision was compromised, but Devrac's 4 eyes could pierce the haze. Elena felt his hand grab hers, pulling her toward an exit she hadn't even noticed. Behind them, Chen was shouting orders, but the controlled Arxians were malfunctioning in the dust, their simplified patterns breaking down. They ran through maintenance tunnels, Elena's childhood knowledge of the facility guiding them. Her heart pounded with more than exertion, rage, grief, determination. Her mother had died protecting both species from this horror, and now Elena would finish what she started. The radiation shield research, she gasped as they emerged into the night air. "We have to destroy it. They can't be allowed to adapt it for their weapons." Divrak pulled her close, his scales displaying that complex pattern of connection she'd come to cherish. "No, we take it with us. We perfect it, use it to reach their facility. Your mother tried to fight them alone. We will succeed together." In the distance, Elena heard helicopters approaching. But for just a moment, safe in the embrace of a being from another world, she felt something her mother had died believing in, hoped for a future where their peoples could do more than coexist. They could thrive together. The dead zone lived up to its name. Elena stared through the viewport of their makeshift spacecraft, a salvaged research vessel they'd modified with their combined radiation shield technology. The space between Earth and Arxian territory was a graveyard of twisted metal and cosmic debris, painted in eerie colors by the radiation waves that had kept both species at a safe distance for decades. "Shield integrity at 87%, Divrak announced, his scales glowing faintly in the dim light of their instruments. "Your mother's theories were remarkable, Elena. Combined with our technology, they've created something neither of our species could achieve alone." Elena smiled despite their grim situation. "Just like us." The past week had been a blur of narrow escapes and desperate preparation. After fleeing the mining facility, they'd made contact with a small group of trusted allies, humans and Arxians who had suspected the conspiracy but lacked proof. With their help, they'd gathered resources and modified the vessel, all while staying one step ahead of Chen's forces. Energy signature detected, Divrak's voice pulled Elena from her thoughts. "Matching the frequency patterns I'd tracked before my capture." Elena adjusted their course, guiding them toward a massive field of debris. At first glance, it looked like any other collection of space junk, but as they drew closer, patterns emerged, deliberate arrangements, hidden docking ports. They built their facility inside the debris field, Elena breathed. Using the radiation and wreckage as natural camouflage. That's why no one ever found it. "Clever," Divrak agreed, his scales shifting to a pattern that indicated both admiration and disgust. "But not clever enough." They docked at a hidden airlock, their ship's modified signatures fooling the facility's sensors into reading them as routine maintenance drones. As they prepared to board, Elena found herself studying Divrak's movements, the now familiar patterns of his scales that spoke volumes to her trained eye. "You're worried," she said softly. Divrak's 4 eyes met hers. "What we find here, it may change everything between our peoples, and between us." Elena reached out, touching his scales in a way that would have seemed impossible weeks ago. "Whatever we find, we face it together. That's one thing that won't change." The facility's interior was a nightmare of sterile corridors and sealed laboratories. They moved silently, Divrak's combat training and Elena's knowledge of research protocols guiding them past security measures. But nothing could have prepared them for what they found in the central lab. "By all the stars," Divrak whispered, his scales paling to a color Elena had never seen before. Rows of stasis pods lined the walls, each containing a hybrid being, part human, part Arxian, all twisted into something that should not exist. Monitoring stations displayed genetic sequences, neural patterns, combat data. "They're trying to create perfect soldiers," Elena said, her voice shaking as she downloaded data from a terminal. "Using my mother's research on biological compatibility to force integration between our species." Integration without consent, without harmony. Divrak moved closer to one of the pods, his scales rippling with sorrow. "They took something beautiful, the potential for our peoples to truly understand each other, and corrupted it into this." A familiar voice made them both freeze. "And yet, here you both are, proving our theories correct." Chen emerged from the shadows, flanked by more of his controlled Arxian soldiers. But these were different from the ones at the mining facility, more refined, their movements more fluid. A human scientist and an Arxian warrior, working together, growing closer, Chen smiled coldly. "You've demonstrated exactly what we theorized. that our species can be merged, improved, though our methods are perhaps more efficient than your slow path of mutual understanding. You're insane, Elena spat, positioning herself beside Devrak. This isn't improvement, it's enslavement. My mother wanted to help our species cooperate naturally, not force them into some twisted hybrid army. Your mother was a dreamer, Chen scoffed. She thought our species could evolve together through choice and time. But evolution needs a push, Elena. Look around you. We're creating the future. Soldiers who combine the best of both species, free from the messy complications of emotion and free will. Devrak's scales flared with a pattern Elena had never seen, pure, dangerous intensity. You understand nothing of either species. True strength comes from choice, from trust freely given. What you've created is an abomination. Strong words from someone who's clearly formed a rather intimate bond with a human. Chen's smile widened. Tell me, Elena, have you documented all his scale patterns yet? The ones that appear when he looks at you? Elena felt Devrak tense beside her. She'd been cataloging every new pattern, every shift and change, but some she kept private, too precious to analyze. The difference, she said firmly, is that what's between us grew from understanding, from choice. We learned to trust each other, to see past our differences. You're just creating slaves. No, Chen corrected. We're creating the future. And you too, with your unique bond, will help us perfect it, willingly or not. The controlled Arxians moved forward, but Elena and Devrak were ready. They'd practiced for this, developed strategies that combined their strengths. Elena's scientific knowledge helped her predict and counter the simplified attack patterns, while Devrak's combat expertise kept them alive. As they fought, Elena noticed something extraordinary. The controlled Arxians couldn't adapt to their teamwork, couldn't comprehend the fluid way she and Devrak moved together. Their programming expected either human or Arxian tactics, not this seamless blend of both. The data transfer is complete, Elena called out, checking her device while ducking under an attack. Everything they've done, everyone involved, it's all documented. Then it's time to end this. Devrak's scales blazed with determination as he fought his way to a control panel. Elena, the sequence. She understood immediately. Together, they discovered a flaw in the facility's radiation shielding. With the right code sequence, they could overload it, destroying all of Chen's research, while their own improved shields would keep them safe. You'll kill everyone here, Chen realized, his composure finally cracking. No, Elena met his eyes as her fingers flew over the controls. The emergency pods will give everyone time to evacuate. Everyone except the poor souls you've already killed through your experiments. This ends now. The facility's alarms blared as radiation began pouring in through deliberately created breaches. Chen and his forces ran for the escape pods, their controlled Arxians falling into confusion as their programming failed to account for the crisis. Elena. Devrak's voice was urgent as he pulled her toward their ship. The pattern you've been asking about, the one I never explained. Tell me later, she said, running beside him as the facility began to break apart. When we're safe, when we've exposed everything, when. He pulled her to a stop, his scales blazing with that complex, beautiful pattern she'd never documented. It means love, he said simply. It has since that first night we escaped together. I just didn't know how to tell you. Elena's heart soared even as alarms blared around them. In that moment, surrounded by danger and destruction, she finally understood what her mother had been working toward, not just coexistence, but the potential for something far more profound. They ran for their ship, hand in hand, leaving behind the twisted remnants of one vision of the future to embrace another, one built on choice, understanding, and love that transcended the barriers between worlds. The emergency session of the Interstellar Council was unlike anything in diplomatic history. Representatives from Earth and Arxiath sat together in the neutral space station orbiting Mars, their attention fixed on the holographic evidence playing before them. Elena stood beside Devrak, their presence together causing as much stir as the damning proof they'd brought. The recording showed the horrors they discovered, the twisted experiments, the violated bodies of both species, Chen's own confession. Elena felt Devrak's scales shift against her arm, displaying patterns of tension only she could read now. This evidence is disturbing, the Earth ambassador said finally, her face pale. Dr. Martinez, you understand the gravity of what you're presenting. This implicates members of both our governments. We understand perfectly, Elena responded, her voice steady. Every name, every connection, every credit transfer, it's all there. The conspiracy goes deeper than just Chen's facility. There are others. The Arxian High Commander's four eyes narrowed. Guard Devrak, you're one of our most decorated warriors. Why did you not bring this to your own people first? Devrak's scales rippled with a pattern of respectful defiance. Because, Commander, I discovered that some of our own leaders were involved. Just as humans who feared and distrusted us funded these experiments, there were Arxians who sought to use this research for their own ends. Murmurs filled the chamber as more evidence played, documents showing how both species extremists had worked together, united in their desire to create weapons they could control. Elena stepped forward, her hand brushing against Devrak's in a gesture that didn't go unnoticed. My mother, Dr. Sara Martinez, discovered the beginnings of this conspiracy 20 years ago, she said clearly. She died trying to stop it. We're here to finish what she started, but also to show something else. She turned to Devrak, drawing strength from the now familiar patterns of his scales. To show that our species can work together, trust each other, even love each other, without force or manipulation. The chamber erupted in chaos. The very idea of human-Arxian relationships was taboo, unthinkable to most. Elena saw disgust, shock, and fear on faces of both species. But she also saw something else: curiosity, wonder, and in some younger representatives, hope. You speak of love, the Arxian commander's voice cut through the noise, yet you cannot understand our ways, our biology, our cultural bonds. I understand more than you know, Elena interrupted, pulling up her research files. 20 years studying your people, documenting every scale pattern, every cultural nuance. And Devrak has spent weeks teaching me things that never made it into any official record. She displayed images of Arxian scale patterns, each with detailed annotations. Your people express emotions through these patterns. They're not just colors, they're a language of the soul. The Arxian representative stirred, clearly unsettled by her deep knowledge. Devrak stepped forward, his scales displaying a pattern that made several older Arxians gasp. This pattern, he said proudly, is one our people reserve for the deepest spiritual connections. It cannot be forced or faked. I display it now, for Elena, before you all. This is unprecedented, the Earth ambassador sputtered. The implications for our treaties, our separation protocols, are exactly what we need to discuss. A new voice rang out. A young Arxian diplomat stood, her scales showing patterns of progressive thought. We created the separation protocols out of fear and mistrust. Yet, here we see two individuals who've proven that trust is possible, that connection can transcend biology. The conspirators tried to force our species together through science and violence, Elena added. They failed because true understanding can't be forced. It has to grow naturally, through choice and respect. The debate raged for hours. Evidence of the conspiracy was irrefutable, and arrests were already being made across both territories. But the deeper implications of Elena and Devrak's relationship sparked even more heated discussions. Finally, the council made its decisions. The separation protocols would be reviewed and gradually relaxed. A joint task force would hunt down remaining conspiracy cells, and most surprisingly, a new research initiative would be established, one focused on studying and facilitating natural cooperation between species. Dr. Martinez, the Earth ambassador, approached them after the session. The council would like you to head this initiative, with Devrak as your Arxian counterpart. Your unique perspective makes you ideally suited. Elena felt Devrak's scales shift against her skin, joy, pride, love in a pattern only she could fully read. "We would be honored," she replied, "but we have conditions." In the end, they got everything they asked for. The research would be transparent, overseen by both governments. No more secret facilities, no more hidden agendas. They would study voluntary interactions between species, documenting the natural development of understanding and trust. As they left the council chamber, Elena noticed de Vrack's scales displaying that private pattern again, the one that meant love. But there was something new in it, a variation she hadn't seen before. "That's different," she said softly as they walked through the station's corridors. "The pattern, it's evolved." De Vrack's 4 eyes crinkled in what she now knew was a smile. "Because we have evolved, Elena. What we feel, what we've created together, it's something new. Something neither of our species has seen before. And now we get to help others understand it." She leaned against him, no longer caring who saw. "My mother would have loved this. Real research, real progress, based on choice and understanding." "She helped make it possible," de Vrack said softly. "Her work protected us in the dead zone. Her death exposed the conspiracy. And her daughter—" his scales rippled with that beautiful, complex pattern. "Her daughter proved that love truly can transcend every barrier we create." They reached the observation deck, Earth and Mars hanging like jewels in the void. Somewhere out there, other facilities like Chen's were being discovered and shut down. But more importantly, people from both worlds were watching them, seeing that coexistence wasn't just possible, it was wonderful. "Ready for our next adventure?" Elena asked, taking de Vrack's hand. His scales shimmered with love and possibility. "With you? Always." The stars watched as human and Arxian stood together, their unique bond a beacon for both their peoples. They had faced death, uncovered conspiracy, and challenged the foundations of their societies. But their greatest adventure, showing others the path to understanding, was just beginning. And in the pattern of de Vrack's scales, in the warmth of Elena's smile, 2 worlds could see their future, not in forced integration or sterile experiments, but in the simple, profound power of love freely given and joyfully returned. 1 year after the council meeting, the Interspecies Research Center floated serenely in neutral space, its distinctive spiral design representing the intertwining of human and Arxian culture. Elena stood in her office, watching as another group of volunteers arrived, 3 humans and 2 Arxians, all willing participants in the ongoing study of cross-species relationships. They seemed nervous, de Vrack observed from behind her, his scales displaying the subtle pattern Elena now recognized as amused affection, just as we were, once. "Were we ever that young?" Elena smiled, leaning back against him. The past year had transformed everything, not just their relationship, but the very way their species interacted. The center had become more than just a research facility. It was a symbol of change, a place where humans and Arxians could meet freely, learn about each other without fear or prejudice. Elena and de Vrack's relationship, once considered scandalous, had paved the way for others to explore connections across the species barrier. Dr. Martinez, a young human researcher, burst into the office, excitement radiating from her face. "The results from the empathy study, they're incredible. The Arxian participants are developing new scale patterns, ones never documented before." Elena exchanged a knowing look with de Vrack. They'd seen this happening more and more. Arxians who spent time with humans began displaying more complex emotional patterns, while humans reported increased sensitivity to subtle emotional cues. Both species were evolving, not through forced experimentation, but through genuine connection. "Show me," Elena said, following the researcher to the observation room. Through the one-way glass, they watched as humans and Arxians engaged in simple cooperation exercises. The patterns flowing across Arxian scales were mesmerizing, colors and combinations that spoke of new emotions, new ways of understanding. "It's beautiful," de Vrack murmured, his own scales shifting in response. "They're creating their own language, just as we did." Elena's hand found his, their fingers intertwining in what had become a natural gesture. Their own relationship had deepened over the year, growing into something that defied traditional definition in either culture. They were partners, researchers, pioneers, and something entirely new, a bridge between worlds. Director Martinez, her comm unit chirped. The council representatives have arrived for the annual review. Elena straightened her uniform, feeling Devrak's reassuring presence beside her. The annual review was crucial. Their funding, their freedom to continue this work, depended on showing real progress. They entered the conference room to find a much different scene than the emergency session a year ago. The representatives sat comfortably together, humans and Arxians, mingling without the rigid separation of the past. Many had been skeptical of the center's mission, but the results were undeniable. Dr. Martinez, Guard Devrak, the Earth ambassador, smiled warmly. All shall I say, directors, your latest findings are remarkable. Elena activated the holographic display, showing a year's worth of data. We've documented over 300 new Arxian emotional patterns, all developing through natural interaction with humans. More importantly, we're seeing increased empathy and understanding on both sides. The fear is fading, Devrak added, his scales displaying the teaching pattern he used during presentations. Both species are learning that our differences make us stronger together, not weaker. The Arxian High Commander, once their harshest critic, leaned forward. And what of the biological compatibility concerns? The very issues that Chen's group tried to force. We've discovered something fascinating. Elena brought up new data. Prolonged positive interaction between our species is creating subtle but natural changes. Humans are developing increased sensitivity to Arxian emotional cues, while Arxians are discovering new ways to express emotions they never knew they had. It's evolution through understanding, not forced manipulation. The presentation continued, but Elena found her mind wandering to the private research she and Devrak had been conducting, studying their own relationship, documenting every new pattern, every breakthrough in understanding. They had become more than a case study, they were living proof of what was possible. Later that evening, after the council members had left with glowing reports, Elena and Devrak stood in their private quarters, watching the stars wheel past the station's windows. Do you ever regret it? Elena asked softly. Everything we gave up, all the chaos we caused. Devrak's scales shifted through patterns that told their story, the fear of their first meeting, the trust that grew in darkness, the love that bloomed in crisis, and something newer, deeper, that they were still discovering. Look, he said, gesturing to a small group of humans and Arxians laughing together in the station's garden dome below. A year ago, that sight would have been impossible. We didn't just change our own lives, Elena. We changed the future. Elena smiled, recognizing the pattern flowing across his scales, the one that had started it all, the one that meant love transcending boundaries. My mother believed this was possible, not just coexistence, but real connection between our peoples. She would be proud. Devrak pulled her closer, not just of the research, but of how far we've all come. The conspirators tried to force evolution through science. We achieved more through simple trust and understanding. A notification chimed. Another group of volunteers arriving, more souls brave enough to reach across the divide between species. Elena and Devrak would welcome them, guide them, show them that fear could turn to love, that differences could become strengths. Ready for another day of changing the universe? Devrak asked, his scales shimmering with joy and possibility. Elena reached up, tracing the now familiar patterns of his scales. She had learned to read them as clearly as any human expression, just as he had learned to understand the subtle nuances of her smiles, her tears, her laughter. With you, always. As they moved to greet the newcomers, their steps in perfect harmony, Elena realized that they had created something greater than either of them had imagined. Not just a love story, not just a scientific breakthrough, but a new way forward for both their peoples. The stars watched over the research station, witnessing the slow, beautiful dance of two species learning to understand each other. And in every shared laugh, every new scale pattern, every moment of connection, the future was being rewritten, not through force or fear, but through the simple, profound power of love freely given and joyfully returned.